Time does not heal all wounds. That is a lie told by people who have never been truly cut open. Time just builds scar tissue over the wound so you can function without bleeding to death. For the first 2 years in Maplewood, I functioned. I washed dishes, I slept in the tiny room above the kitchen, and I kept my head down. But Silas, the grumpy giant who owned the diner, refused to let me rot in front of a sink forever. One humid summer evening, while I was taking out a heavy trash bag, he cornered me in the alleyway. He handed me a damp, wrinkled pamphlet from the local community college. "I am not paying you to scrub pots until your hair falls out," Silas grumbled, lighting a cheap cigar. "You're smart and you're angry. Use it. Sign up for the heating and air conditioning program. People will always need to be warm in the winter and cold in the summer. It is a trade that never dies." I stared at the pamphlet. I didn't have a high school diploma. I told him that. Silas just blew a ring of smoke into the muggy air and told me to get my GED first, and that he would advance me the cash for the tuition if I worked an extra weekend shift. I did not argue. I had nothing else to lose. The next 3 years were a brutal test of human endurance. My life was stripped down to the absolute bare essentials: work, study, and sleep. Mostly work and study. I would wake up at 4 in the morning to prep the diner kitchen, wash dishes for 8 hours, and then take 2 different city buses to the community college for my evening classes. I would sit in the back row of a brightly lit classroom, my hands smelling like old grease and bleach, struggling to keep my eyes open while the instructor drew wiring diagrams on the chalkboard. It was not glamorous. Learning a trade is dirty, exhausting work. I remember one specific side job I took during my final year of the program to pay Silas back. It was January, the temperature was hovering around 9 degrees, and a cheap landlord hired me under the table to fix a broken furnace in a dilapidated rental house. The furnace was located in a crawl space under the floorboards. I had to shimmy on my stomach through mud and freezing water, my flashlight cutting through the pitch-black darkness. The space was barely 2 feet high. The smell hit me before I even saw it. The ductwork had been compromised, and a family of raccoons had gotten inside and died. I spent 4 hours in that freezing, claustrophobic hellhole, pulling out rotting animal carcasses with heavy work gloves, taping up the sheet metal, and rewiring the blower motor. My muscles cramped so badly I could barely breathe. But when I finally crawled out, covered in mud and filth, and heard the beautiful, low roar of the furnace firing up, I felt a massive rush of adrenaline. I stood in the living room of that dump, feeling the warm air push through the floor vents, and something inside my brain finally clicked. Machines made sense. A broken compressor or a blown fuse had a logical explanation. If you put in the work and followed the schematic, you could fix the problem. Machines did not lie to you. Machines did not look you in the eye at a dinner table and destroy your life. When I finally earned my state certification, I did not have a graduation party. There were no balloons or family dinners. It was just me and Silas sitting at the diner counter after closing time. He poured me a cup of black coffee, slid a thick slice of cherry pie across the Formica counter, and nodded at my certificate. It was the proudest moment of my life. I was 22 years old when I made the mistake of looking back. It was a slow Sunday afternoon, and I was at the local public library using their free computers to order some replacement tools online. I was in a good mood. I had moved out of the diner's storage room and was renting a small, clean apartment across town. I was making decent money working for a commercial HVAC company. Life was steady. But curiosity is a toxic thing. I sat in that quiet library, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights, and typed my brother Gavin's name into the search bar of a social media site. I told myself I just wanted to see if they were miserable. I wanted proof that the universe had punished them for throwing me away. I clicked on his public profile. The screen loaded, and the breath was instantly violently knocked out of my lungs. It was a massive family photograph taken on a pristine green lawn. My father was standing tall, wearing an expensive polo shirt, his arm wrapped tightly around my mother. Gavin was there, smiling his arrogant, perfect smile. But the center of the photo was Fiona. She looked radiant, healthy, and completely unbothered. She was holding a little girl with blonde hair, maybe 4 or 5 years old. They were standing in front of a giant banner that read, "Happy birthday to our little miracle." The caption underneath the photo, posted by my mother, read, "Family is everything. So blessed to have my beautiful daughter and granddaughter." The truth always wins. My stomach rolled. A wave of pure, concentrated nausea washed over me. I shoved my chair back, stood up, and practically ran to the library bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and leaned over the toilet, dry heaving until my ribs ached. They were happy. They were completely, perfectly happy. They had not spent a single sleepless night wondering if I was dead in a ditch. They had not shed a single tear over the son they threw into the garbage. They had just closed ranks, played the victims, and replaced me. Fiona had lied, destroyed my entire existence, and her reward was a house full of people who treated her like a saint. I washed my face in the sink, staring at my reflection. The 17-year-old kid was gone. My jaw was broader, my eyes were colder, and my hands were rough and calloused. I realized right then that I was carrying a dead man's name. As long as I was Declan Hayes, I was still tethered to those monsters. I was still the victim in their twisted little fairy tale. The next morning, I did not go to work. I drove straight to the county courthouse. I walked into the clerk's office, pulled out a stack of cash I had saved, and asked for the paperwork for a legal name change. The clerk, an older woman with thick glasses, asked me the reason for the change. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that my family had died in a fire and I wanted a fresh start. I chose the last name Cole. It was a variation of the word cold. It felt fitting. Declan Cole. 6 weeks later, I stood in front of a judge in a quiet courtroom. He hit his wooden gavel against the desk and declared the name change official. When I walked down the stone steps of the courthouse holding the legally binding document, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt lighter. I had surgically removed the cancerous tumor of my past. I was a ghost to them, and they were finally ghosts to me. Fast forward 5 years. I was 27 years old, and I was no longer a scared kid running from the law. I was Declan Cole, and I had built a fortress. I had spent my early 20s working for a massive commercial heating and air company. I took all the overtime nobody else wanted. I worked holidays, weekends, and night shifts. I earned a reputation as the guy who could fix the impossible systems. But my real break came because of a ductwork disaster and a guy named Julian. Julian was a good guy, a father of 3 who worked alongside me. One afternoon, we were doing a routine maintenance check on a wealthy client's massive suburban home. The client had left an envelope containing $800 in cash on the kitchen counter to pay a landscaper. When the client came back inside, the envelope was gone. The boss was furious. He dragged Julian into the front yard and was minutes away from firing him and calling the cops, accusing him of stealing the cash. Julian was having a full-blown panic attack, swearing on his kids' lives that he didn't touch it. I saw the look of absolute terror in Julian's eyes. It was the exact same look I had in the mirror 10 years ago. I did not hesitate. I walked back into the house, looked at the layout of the kitchen, and grabbed my ladder. "Check the return air vent," I told the boss, my voice completely flat. I climbed up, unscrewed the massive metal grate on the wall right above where the envelope had been sitting, and reached my arm deep into the duct. The HVAC system in the house was pulling massive amounts of negative pressure. I pulled my hand out, and right there, stuck against the thick paper filter, was the envelope of cash. The wind from the return duct had literally sucked it off the counter. The boss apologized profusely. Julian practically collapsed in tears, shaking my hand and calling me a lifesaver. Word got around the company, and suddenly, I wasn't just a good mechanic, I was a guy you could trust with your life. By the time I was 26, I had saved enough money to quit. I bought a heavily used, white cargo van, painted the words "Coal Heating and Air" on the side in bold blue letters, and started my own business. It started small, mostly residential repairs, but my reputation carried me. Within a year, I had 3 employees, 2 more vans, and a steady stream of commercial contracts. My personal life was just as solid and just as heavily guarded. I had bought a small, three-bedroom house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by tall pine trees. It was quiet. It was safe. I met Nadia when I hired a local agency to redesign my company logo. She was a graphic designer with sharp eyes, a sarcastic sense of humor, and a deep respect for boundaries. On our third date, she asked about my family. I told her the truth, without the gruesome details. I told her they were toxic, they betrayed me, and they were dead to me. She didn't press, she didn't offer fake sympathy, she just nodded and said, "Then we build our own." Nadia moved in with me 6 months later. We adopted a rescue dog, a massive, goofy shepherd mix named Buster, who guarded the front door like a soldier. I had a thriving business, a woman who loved me for exactly who I was, a loyal dog, and a quiet house. I had beaten the odds. I had won. But I should have known that the universe hates it when you get too comfortable. The timer on the bomb had just been reset, and it was finally about to go off. It was mid-July, and the heat was oppressive, the kind of heavy, wet heat that makes the asphalt shimmer. I was on the flat, tar-covered roof of a bakery, trying to replace a burnt-out condenser motor. The sweat was stinging my eyes, and my hands were covered in black grease. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my work pants. I ignored it. I was neck-deep in wiring. A minute later, it vibrated again. Then a third time. I wiped my hands on an old rag, pulled the phone out, and looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the area code made my chest tight. It was my hometown. I hesitated, but my business line was forwarded to my cell, so I swiped to answer, assuming it was a desperate customer. "Coal heating," I answered gruffly. There was a long, static-filled pause. Then, a woman's voice, trembling and small. "Declan." The wrench in my hand slipped and clattered against the metal unit. The ambient noise of the city traffic below seemed to instantly vanish. I knew that voice. It had been 10 years, but you never forget the voice of the girl who told you she chose her comfort over your life. "Sienna," I said. My voice was dangerously low. "How did you get this number?" "I searched your business registry," she said quickly, her breath hitching. "Declan, please don't hang up. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But you need to hear this. It's on the news here. It's everywhere." I leaned heavily against the hot metal of the air conditioning unit. "What is it?" "Fiona," Sienna said, breaking into a sob. "Fiona was arrested 2 days ago." My brain completely stalled. Arrested? For what? For fraud. And filing a false police report, Sienna explained, her words spilling out in a frantic rush. "Declan, she tried to do it again. She got involved with a guy from the country club, an older guy named Nolan Pierce. When he tried to break it off, she went to the cops. She claimed he assaulted her. She claimed she was pregnant." I closed my eyes. The blinding sunlight against my eyelids turned red. The sociopath hadn't changed her playbook, she had just found a richer target. But this guy, Sienna continued, Nolan, he didn't run. He had money. He hired the best defense lawyers in the state. They hired private investigators. They pulled her medical records, her phone logs, everything. They completely destroyed her story. And when the police started pressing her with the evidence, she broke. "Declan," she cracked completely. "What did she say?" I asked, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. "She confessed," Sienna cried. "She confessed to the lie about Nolan. But the detectives kept pushing, asking about her history. And she told them about you. She admitted it on tape, Declan. She said she made the whole thing up 10 years ago." The silence stretched between us. I was waiting for the rush of relief. I was waiting for the overwhelming joy of vindication. I was waiting to feel like the weight of the world had been lifted. But I felt absolutely nothing. Just a heavy, terrifying numbness. "Who was it?" I finally asked. "Who is the father of the kid?" "A guy named Trenton," Sienna whispered. "He was a local dealer. Fiona said she slept with him, and when she got pregnant, he threatened to kill her if she told anyone. So she panicked. She blamed you because she knew your parents would instantly protect her and crush you. The truth. 10 years of homelessness, freezing nights, bleeding hands, and absolute isolation, all because a spoiled teenager was scared of a small-time drug dealer. Declan, you're cleared, Sienna sobbed. The police released a statement. Your parents, they know. The whole town knows what they did to you. Are you finished? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Declan, I'm so sorry. I should have stood by you. I was a coward. Yes, you were, I said smoothly. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up. I stood on that sweltering roof, looking out over the city I had conquered. The truth was out, but it didn't fix the past. It just meant the ghosts were finally coming to haunt the people who created them. When a dam breaks, the water doesn't ask for permission before it destroys everything in its path. The news of Fiona's arrest and confession was the dam breaking, and my office was directly in the flood zone. By the following Monday, the phone calls started. Not the business line, but the private line. Word had traveled fast. My receptionist, a tough older woman named Brenda, fielded dozens of calls from unrecognizable numbers with my hometown area code. I told her to block every single one of them. I was not interested in hearing apologies from people who had gladly watched me burn at the stake. But blocking a phone number does not stop desperation. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, going over the payroll spreadsheets, when Buster, my dog, let out a low, rumbling growl from his bed in the corner. I looked up. Through the glass wall of my office, I saw her standing in the reception area. My mother. She looked nothing like the proud, arrogant woman from the country club photos. She looked shriveled. Her hair, which used to be perfectly dyed blonde, was heavily streaked with gray. Her shoulders were hunched, and she was wearing a faded trench coat. In her trembling hands, she was holding a glass Pyrex dish covered in aluminum foil. I felt a surge of pure, freezing anger. I stood up, walked out of my office, and stood in the lobby. Brenda looked at me, ready to call security, but I raised a hand to stop her. My mother looked up. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Declan, she gasped. Her voice was cracked and weak. Look at you. You are so handsome. How did you get into this building? I asked. My tone was casual, like I was speaking to a confused delivery driver. She flinched. She held up the glass dish like it was a shield. I made your favorite, she whispered, tears spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. Chicken and rice casserole. I remembered how much you loved it when you were a little boy. I wanted to see my son. I stared at the dish. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. She actually believed that a warm meal could erase a decade of torture. I am not your son, I said evenly. Your son is a memory that you killed on your front lawn 10 years ago. You are trespassing. Please, she sobbed, taking a step forward. Declan, we didn't know. Fiona lied to us. She manipulated us. We were victims too. Your father and I, we have been sick with grief since the news broke. You have to forgive us. We are family. Victims. I let out a short, harsh laugh. You didn't ask me a single question. You didn't give me a trial. You packed my life into garbage bags and threw me to the wolves because it was easier than facing a scandal. I was 17 years old. I slept in a freezing car for 3 days. I ate out of garbage cans. Where was my chicken casserole then? She covered her mouth with a shaking hand, sobbing hysterically. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Let me make it right. Just let me talk to you. Take your food, I pointed to the door, and get out. If you ever come within 50 feet of my business or my home again, I will have you arrested for stalking. Leave. She stood there, trembling, waiting for me to break. I didn't even blink. Finally, she turned and walked out, leaving the casserole on one of the lobby chairs. I grabbed the dish and threw it straight into the lobby trash can, shattering the glass. 3 days later, my father tried his luck. He showed up in the parking lot, leaning against his SUV, trying to look imposing and authoritative. He was wearing a suit, attempting to play the role of the benevolent patriarch ready to welcome his lost sheep back to the flock. He actually smiled when I walked out the front doors. Son, he boomed, holding his arms out. It takes a big man to admit when he was wrong. And I was wrong. Let's go get a beer and clear the air. Water under the bridge. I didn't break my stride. I didn't even look at him. I pulled out my phone, dialed the private security firm that patrolled the industrial park, and reported a hostile trespasser threatening my employees. The security cruiser rolled up less than 2 minutes later. My father tried to argue, his face turning that familiar shade of purple rage, but the guards threatened to call the actual police. I watched through the glass doors as he was forced into his SUV and escorted off the property. He didn't look like a patriarch anymore. He just looked like a pathetic old man who had finally realized he possessed zero power over my life. The fallout from the truth is never clean. It is a slow, toxic leak that ruins everything it touches. Over the next month, I did not have to seek out information about my former family. The gossip practically delivered itself to my doorstep. Nadia, who found the entire situation fascinating and horrifying, kept tabs on the local news from my hometown. The Hayes family, once the pillar of the community, was disintegrating in real time. My father's arrogant display in my parking lot was apparently his last gasp of control. A week after I had him escorted off my property, he was fired from his prestigious insurance firm. The scandal was too much for the corporate board, but the final nail in the coffin was an explosive anger fit he threw in the middle of the office when a colleague asked him about the arrest. He was forced into early, disgraced retirement. My brother, Gavin, the golden boy who spat on me while I was bleeding on the floor, faced his own reckoning. His wife, a woman who came from a respectable family, filed for divorce. She cited extreme emotional distress and packed up their 2 children, moving to a different state. She publicly stated she refused to let her kids be raised near a family that was capable of such profound cruelty. And my mother simply stopped leaving the house. The charity board stripped her of her title, the country club politely asked her to pause her membership, and the neighbors stopped waving. They were completely isolated, drowning in a prison of their own making. Then, the package arrived. It was a heavy, rectangular cardboard box delivered by a courier to my office. There was no return address, but I recognized the frantic, looping cursive handwriting on the shipping label immediately. It was from my mother. I carried the box into my warehouse in the back of the building. I set it down on a metal workbench and used my box cutter to slice through the heavy packing tape. I opened the cardboard flaps. Inside were letters. Hundreds of them. Some were sealed in expensive envelopes, others were just folded pieces of notebook paper. There were letters from my mother, letters from my father, and a thick stack of letters from Gavin. Some of the envelopes had the words, "Please read," or "I am so sorry," written across the front. It was a physical manifestation of their guilt. It was a desperate attempt to dump their emotional baggage onto my shoulders so they could finally sleep at night. I stood there staring at the pile of paper. A younger, angrier version of myself might have burned them in the parking lot. A weaker version of myself might have read them late at night, searching for some magical combination of words that would heal the 17-year-old kid inside me. But I was Declan Cole. I didn't need their words. I picked up a heavy roll of silver duct tape from the workbench. I folded the cardboard flaps back down and began taping the box shut. I wrapped the tape around the box horizontally, vertically, over and over again, sealing it so tightly it would take a chainsaw to open it. I carried the heavily taped box over to a high metal shelving unit where we kept overstock air filters. I shoved the box onto the top shelf, sliding it into a dark corner where it would gather dust. I used it to prop up a broken piece of PVC pipe. That was all their apologies were worth to me. Structural support for plumbing garbage. I walked back into my office, washed the dust off my hands, and sat down at my desk. I opened my email to check a quote for a new client. Sitting at the very top of my inbox was an email from the State Department of Corrections. The subject line read, "Visitation Request Approval." I clicked on the email. It was an official notification. Inmate Fiona Hayes, currently awaiting trial and held at the state correctional facility, had requested a face-to-face visitation with me. The email stated that as the victim of her prior false police report, I had the right to accept or deny the request. I stared at the screen. Fiona, the architect of the bomb. She was sitting in a concrete cell, stripped of her golden child status, finally facing the reality of her actions. She wanted to see me. Nadia walked into my office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She saw the look on my face, set the coffee down, and walked around the desk to look at the monitor. She read the email in silence. "Are you going to ignore it?" she asked softly, resting a hand on my shoulder. I looked at the approval button on the screen. Ignoring her would be easy, but leaving a weed in the ground means it might grow back. You have to pull it out by the roots. "No," I said, grabbing the mouse. "I am going to go look the monster in the eye." I clicked accept. The state correctional facility was a massive, ugly sprawl of gray concrete and razor wire located 2 hours north of the city. Driving up to the visitor gates, you could feel the despair radiating from the walls. It was a place designed to crush the human spirit. I walked through the metal detectors, surrendered my phone and keys to a guard with dead eyes, and was escorted into the main visitation room. It smelled like industrial bleach, stale sweat, and old vending machine food. I sat down at a small, scratched metal table bolted to the floor. The room was loud, filled with the murmurs of broken families trying to connect across a divide of bad choices. Then, the heavy steel door on the inmate side buzzed open. A guard walked Fiona into the room. I almost did not recognize her. The radiant, untouchable woman from the social media photo was completely gone. She looked like a ghost. She was wearing an oversized, faded orange jumpsuit. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was flat and greasy, pulled back into a messy knot. Her skin was sallow, and she had dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. She had lost at least 15 pounds. She looked small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. She walked slowly toward my table. When she saw me sitting there, in a tailored dark shirt, looking broad and composed, she physically flinched. She sat down across from me, folding her hands tightly in her lap, refusing to meet my eyes. We sat in silence for a long time. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I wanted her to drown in the awkwardness. "You came," she finally whispered. Her voice was raspy, like she had been screaming. "I am here," I replied, my voice completely flat. "Make it fast. I have a business to run." She swallowed hard, finally looking up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot and swimming with tears. "Declan, I am so sorry. I know those words don't mean anything. I know I ruined your life. I have nightmares about what I did to you every single night. I needed to look at you and apologize." "Why me?" I asked. It was the only question I actually cared about. "Trenton threatened you." You panicked. "Fine. But why me? Why not a stranger? Why the brother who protected you?" Fiona let out a ragged sob, burying her face in her hands. "Because you were safe," she cried. "You were quiet. You never fought back. I knew that if I blamed you, Mom and Dad would instantly protect me because I was their special project. And I knew they would crush you because you would never fight them. It was the path of least resistance. I was a coward. I just wanted to save myself." The sheer selfishness of it was staggering. She destroyed a 17-year-old boy's life purely for logistical convenience. "You succeeded," I said coldly. "You saved yourself. You got 10 years of a perfect life while I ate garbage and slept in the freezing cold." She wiped her nose on her orange sleeve, looking at me with absolute desperation. "I lost everything, Declan. Nolan's lawyers took my house, my car, my savings. Mom and Dad won't even accept my phone calls. I am completely alone in here." "Good," I said without blinking. "You belong in a cage." Fiona's breath hitched. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "There is something else. Please. My daughter. Chloe." My jaw tightened. "What about her?" "She is 9 years old," Fiona sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. "She is staying with a foster family because Gavin and my parents refused to take her in. But Declan, she doesn't know the truth. She doesn't know about Trenton." I frowned, not understanding. "The whole town knows the truth." "Not her," Fiona cried. "Mom and Dad, they told her you were a dangerous man. For her whole life, they told her that you were her father and that you were a criminal who ran away. When I got arrested, they told her it was a misunderstanding. They never corrected the lie about you. They were too ashamed to admit to a child that they had been wrong for a decade. She still thinks you are the monster. The rage I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a cold, blinding white fury. My parents were so deeply infected by their own pride that they were willing to let a 9-year-old girl carry the psychological weight of a lie just to protect their own fragile egos. I stood up slowly. The metal chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. Fiona looked up at me, terrified. "You listen to me," I said, leaning over the table, my voice a deadly, quiet hiss. "I am going to leave this prison, and I am going to go back to a beautiful home, a successful company, and a woman who loves me. I am going to live a long, happy life. And you? You are going to rot in this concrete box. And every night when you close your eyes, I want you to remember that your own daughter is out there, infected by the poison that you created. You are not a victim. You are a parasite." I didn't wait for a response. I turned around and walked toward the heavy steel doors. I heard her break down into hysterical, agonizing wails behind me. The guards rushed over to her table. I didn't look back. I walked out into the bright sunlight, took a deep breath of fresh air, and left the ghost in her cage. 6 months after my visit to the prison, Fiona was officially convicted of fraud and filing a false police report. She was sentenced to 5 years in the state penitentiary. But criminal court only puts people in a cell. It doesn't balance the scales. In late November, I received a phone call from a high-powered law firm downtown. They were representing Nolan Pierce, the wealthy man Fiona had tried to scam. Nolan was pursuing a massive civil lawsuit against Fiona for defamation of character, emotional distress, and financial damages. His legal team had discovered that while Fiona was bankrupt, she possessed a massive, untouchable trust fund set up by my parents when she was adopted, designed to pay out when she turned 30. Nolan wanted it, and his lawyers wanted me to testify. I agreed immediately. I met Nolan Pierce in a polished mahogany conference room. He was a sharp, distinguished man in his early 50s who looked exhausted. We shook hands, two men connected by a shared trauma caused by the exact same weapon. We didn't talk much, but the mutual understanding was absolute. We were both going to make sure she had nothing left to return to when she got out. The civil trial was brief, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Because of her criminal conviction, Fiona's defense was practically non-existent. She was brought into the courtroom in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. My parents were not in the gallery. Nobody was there for her. When it was my turn to take the witness stand, I swore the oath and sat down. Nolan's lead attorney, a ruthless man in a $3,000 suit, walked me through the last 10 years of my life. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I was a professional, articulate business owner delivering a clinical autopsy of my own destruction. I detailed the financial impact of being thrown out at 17. I provided the exact dollar amount of the wages I lost, the cost of my late education, and the psychological therapy I eventually had to pay for to deal with the panic attacks. I painted a perfectly clear, legally binding picture of how Fiona's calculated lie had systematically dismantled my life. Fiona sat at the defense table, her head bowed, weeping silently through my entire testimony. I never looked at her. When the judge delivered his ruling, he did not hold back. He awarded Nolan Pierce a staggering sum in damages. He then looked directly at me and stated that while the statute of limitations for civil action on my original case had expired, he was factoring my testimony into the punitive damages awarded against the defendant. The ruling effectively authorized the seizure and liquidation of Fiona's entire trust fund to pay the settlement. She was wiped out. Every dime my parents had set aside for their golden child was gone. She would leave prison as a penniless felon with a destroyed reputation and no family to rely on. I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon into the crisp autumn air. Nolan Pierce shook my hand on the steps. "Thank you, Declan," he said sincerely. "You didn't have to put yourself through this again." "Yes, I did," I replied. It was the only way to close the door. I drove back to my house. When I pulled into the driveway, Buster was barking happily at the front window, and Nadia was on the porch, holding 2 mugs of hot coffee. I walked up the steps, took the coffee, and kissed her. The war was officially over. I had survived the blast, rebuilt the city, and salted the earth where the enemy stood. I was finally completely free. It has been over a year since the civil trial. Life has a way of settling into a quiet, predictable rhythm when you stop fighting ghosts. Coal Heating and Air just signed a massive contract with a regional hospital network. Nadia and I are talking about getting married. We are looking at rings next weekend. I don't think about the Hayes family much anymore. They are like characters in a bad movie I watched a decade ago. But occasionally, the universe likes to tap on the glass just to see if you are still paying attention. It was late on a Tuesday night. Nadia was already asleep, and I was in my home office, finishing up some invoices on my laptop. Buster was snoring heavily on the rug near my feet. The only light in the room was the glow of the monitor. My cell phone, sitting on the desk, lit up. It didn't ring, it just showed a notification for a new voicemail. I unlocked the phone. It was an unknown number, but once again, the area code was my hometown. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. There was a heavy, wet coughing sound, followed by the agonizingly slow intake of breath. Declan. It was my father. But the booming, authoritative voice of the insurance executive was completely gone. His voice sounded paper-thin, raspy, and incredibly weak. He sounded like a man who was struggling to draw enough oxygen into his lungs just to speak. Declan, I know you told us never to contact you, he wheezed, pausing to cough violently. I don't even know if you will listen to this. But I am out of time. The doctors, they told me today. It is pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. It is aggressive. They are giving me 3 weeks, maybe a month if I am lucky. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring blankly at the dark wall across the room. I am dying, son, he whispered, his voice cracking with genuine terror. I am laying in this hospital bed, and your mother is a shell of a human being, and Gavin won't even visit me. I have lost everything. And I know I deserve it. I know what I did to you is unforgivable. He paused, crying softly into the phone. The sound of his tears did not make my chest ache. It did not make me feel a sudden surge of empathy. I just felt the cold, hard leather of my chair against my back. Please, he begged, his voice dropping to a desperate rasp. I am begging you. I do not want to die with this on my soul. I just want to see you one last time. I want to look you in the eyes and apologize before I go into the dark. Please, Declan. As your father. Come see me. The voicemail ended. The automated female voice offered me the option to save or delete the message. I sat in the quiet office for a long time. I closed my eyes and pictured the man lying in that hospital bed. I pictured the 4 tubes, the beeping monitors, and the fear in his eyes. Society tells you that when death is at the door, you are supposed to offer grace. You are supposed to forgive the dying because holding on to anger is toxic. But I wasn't angry. I thought about the night of the dinner. I remembered the exact sound his fist made when it shattered my jaw. I remembered the blinding white light, the taste of my own blood on the expensive rug, and the absolute lack of hesitation in his eyes when he threw me out of his house. He didn't care if I died in the cold. He made a choice to protect his pride over my life. Now he was making another choice. He wanted me to drive down there, hold his hand, and absolve him of his sins so he could die with a clean conscience. He didn't want to see me because he loved me. He wanted to see me so he could feel better about himself. It was the ultimate, final act of selfishness. I opened my eyes. I looked down at Buster, who let out a soft sigh in his sleep. I looked at the framed photo of Nadia and me on my desk. I looked at the life I had built from the dirt, using my own 2 bleeding hands. I picked up the phone. I pressed the number 3. Message deleted. The screen went black. I set the phone face down on the desk, turned off the lamp, and walked down the hallway to go to bed. So Reddit, as I sit here looking at the message deleted screen, I feel nothing but peace. But people say holding onto a grudge against a dying man is crossing a line. Am I the asshole for deleting my dying father's final plea and erasing them from my life forever? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button to support the channel and drop your verdict in the comments below.